And we'll leave about 10 minutes open at the end of the half hour for anybody that has any questions. So if you have any questions about the class or the curriculum or topics, I guess a little bit about topics, but mostly about the course and curriculum, think of any questions that you have, please keep them in mind and save them for the end of class. So before we jump right in, let me share my screen here. American paradoxes. It's a pretty straightforward concept. In a lot of American history and a lot of people's perception of American history, there's a bit of a false dichotomy, meaning like a false comparison or a false choice that people try to make, that on one side, America is a good place, and on the other side, America is a bad place. So it's either like America has to be, especially in many Americans' minds, the way that it is played out is America is the greatest country of all time, and it is a special country that has special traits, and everybody, like America is the most special place. And there's even people outside of America who kind of want to believe that, because that's the system that our world is kind of organized around for the last 50, 60 years. But that's not really true. It's not true that America is the most special place in the world, and it has all of these things that make it different and better than other places. So obviously that one kind of goes off to the side. And then another comparison is that a lot of people want to see America as purely bad, that because of things like slavery and global empire, et cetera, that America is this bad place and that its ideals are not real, and none of the things that America does are actually good. It's this false place filled with lies and bad things, which is also not really true, because America has had a massive effect. The ideas that are associated with America have had a massive impact on the way that many other countries will organize themselves, and is served as an example of certain ideals since its foundation. So the way that I put it is, the way that I organize this is into the idea of American paradoxes. And there's three primary paradoxes that I like to divide things into, and you can kind of associate these paradoxes with particular components of American history, particular forces within American history, that if you understand the two sides of the paradox, you can understand why good things happen, and you can understand why bad things happen. Now, this also goes along with my traditional Persia GT component, but the core of my study, my focus on American history, goes into these paradoxes. So without further ado, go ahead and into the chat, can everybody just type the first word that comes into their mind when they think of America? Not a phrase, just a word. What is the first word that you think of when you think of the United States? Hamburger, I like that. I like the honesty there. I actually have a whole lecture on hamburgers. I don't have a whole lecture on pizza, but I tend to actually think of pizza when I think of America too. Union, freedom, unequal, democracy, freedom. So it's kind of interesting. You notice that already we have some paradoxes that pop up when people think about American history. We have freedom, we have democracy, but then we also have unequal. So like freedom is actually the first word that I like to associate. That generally speaking, I would say this is the word that many Americans also themselves associate with the concept of America, that America is the land of the free, home of the brave is the second part of that, but definitely that first part, the concept of freedom. Well, it's kind of true for most of American history, not only with Americans, but many people outside of the United States viewed North America in general, and America specifically, as a place to go to be free. During the imperial era in the 19th century, from 1800 and so on, especially even before that, the American dream, the concept that anyone can come to America and anyone can work hard and succeed, was less a reality in America than a dream that was perceived by people outside of There's a great example of this in the movie from the late 80s called An American Tale, where this family of mice wants to come to America because there's so many cats in Europe. And there's a song from that. It's like, there are no cats in America and the streets are paved with cheese, is how the song goes. It's a good one. You can look it up on YouTube if you want to. I strongly, it's a good movie, American Tale. A lot of people in Europe believed that there were no cats in America and the streets were paved with cheese. Like the idea that the streets are paved with gold. And some people actually believed that this was true, that America was so wealthy and free that anybody could just come and get as much cheese as they wanted, and there were no bad guys. And this still holds very true today, this concept of freedom that Americans believe in, and some people outside of the United States believe in, that you can do what you want to and work hard and succeed, and it's very meaningful. But that's not the only part of the story, because can anybody tell me what they think, what's the consequence of freedom? What happens if everybody can do whatever they want to do? Just go ahead and type it in the chat. Anarchy, lawlessness. And what's the negative component of anarchy? What happens if anybody can do what they want to and there are no laws necessarily? People don't have protection. And so the flip side of freedom is exploitation. Because if everybody's nice and everybody can do what they want to do, then everybody's happy, it's really great. And everybody's around the campfire singing campfire songs, and it's a great time. But when you have bullies or people who don't have any feeling or compassion for other human beings, and there are people in the world who do not have compassion for the suffering of others, unfortunately, if they can do whatever they want to do, well, then people get exploited. People get harmed. The environment gets harmed. And this is the flip side of the freedom, is that when everybody does what they want to do, the people who don't have any power to defend themselves cannot defend themselves against other people who have more power and do what they want to do. And so I associate this with the idea of the American West, the expansion. So you want to go expand, you want to go get some territory that's out there in the wild, wild West, the cowboys and the railroads and things from that time period. Well, the problem with that is Native Americans are living there. And for a lot of the stories that are told about the wild, wild West, it ignores the fact that, that land wasn't empty. That land had people on it. And in order to explore your own freedom, you had to take away the rights and take away the access to those things that other people had. So on one hand, there are no cats in America and the streets are paved with cheese. On the other hand, you have to pay for your own health care, even if you can't afford it. And that land that you're moving on to is basically someone else's who doesn't have as much power as you do. Thumbs up I guess we're not on, thumbs up if you kind of follow me here. And if you have questions, don't hesitate to save them. Well, hesitate, I guess. Hesitate and then save them towards the end of class. So then the next one was also in the list there. Ethan said democracy. And democracy is definitely something that many people associate with America. And this is truly one of the places where America is really unique, where America really did have one of the first functioning modern democracies in human history. If you go back to like ancient Greece and Rome, then you're dealing with like kind of a classical democracy where it's basically just like 50 old guys who own land who meet once a week. So it's more of like a private club than it is a real democracy. But in America, we have the Constitution in the 1790s, when that was put together, is one of the first written constitutions establishing a functional democracy from the very beginning. And this idea that one person, one vote, it definitely didn't start that way at the very beginning, but it ended up there in the long term. And so this idea of democracy is truly one of the good things, serving as an example of how a democracy can function and function well, especially, and I'm saying especially a lot, but I'm emphasizing it here, but especially in the terms of like versus nobility and monarchy and empire. America's concept of democracy was radical beyond most people's belief of what was possible at that time. Now, on the other side of that is the exact problem that I was talking about, is that democracy wasn't for everybody. And that the more power you have, the more that democracy works for you, and the less power you have, the less well that democracy works for you. So the flip side of democracy is corruption, because those systems, when they're put into place, serve to reinforce the power of the people who have it already. Because their vote, it's supposed to be one person, one vote, but it's not actually one person, one vote. It's everybody has a vote, but you also have extra power on top of it if you have money or connections, or your family goes way back with a lot of money into the past. And I usually associate this with the North, because there's a lot of idealism there, a lot of ideas of like a utopia. America is a utopia where all things can be made good in the glory of God. That's a different story that we'll get to about the God thing. But trying to make the world a better place through discussion and conversation. But on the flip side, you tend to ignore smaller voices or marginalized voices. And then finally, the last one wasn't actually, you got we got chaos in there. That kind of covers the bad side of a lot of those there. But union is kind of what Leo said, is kind of what I'm going for. What I call it is multiculturalism, which multiculturalism is the concept of the melting pot, that America is a nation of immigrants, which if anybody tells you any differently, America truly was formed as a nation of immigrants, that there was no person besides the Native Americans, besides the indigenous people who were already here. Every single person who came to America was originally an immigrant. And all of us are the great-great-grandchildren or the great-great-great-great-grandchildren of people who are doing or trying to do the same thing that Mexicans are trying to do today when they come to America, or people from the Hmong people from North Vietnam who came over to Minnesota, which, Minnesota is like one of the coldest places in the US, and the Hmong come from the jungles of northern Vietnam. Like, you can't be more different than that. And that's one of the great things about America, is the way that things mix together. That's where hamburgers and hot dogs come from. That's where pizza comes from. That's where so many of the things that make America is the way that they can be melded together into one culture. That doesn't always work very well, because can anybody guess what the flip side of multiculturalism is on the other side there? The other word that I think a lot of people tend to associate with the United States, especially these days. Yeah, inequality, just straight up, as Ethan said, racism, exactly. And of course, the geographical region that this is associated with is the South. And these three regions, the West as a concept, the North as a concept, and the South as a concept, are associated with geographical regions, and these are associated with groups of settlers who originally came to America in the 1600s for different reasons. And so you'll see these different ways of believing in America, of perceiving America. If you start in 1608, or even if you go all the way back to 1492 when Columbus showed up, these three conceptions, these three motivations are kind of the engines by which America's growth and ideology and story of itself are developed. Now, in my experience, generally speaking, it's leaning slightly towards the positive side over the negative side, but it's like a 55-45 split, with those forces of conservatism and racism and corruption and capitalism, exploitation. Like, the exploitation capitalism is the thing that fits into exploitation there. It's leaning towards the arc of history, bending towards justice, as MLK said and Barack Obama liked to say, but there's a strong counterbalance of people who don't want anything to change. They benefit from the existing system. And so they're constantly pulling. They're constantly pulling to try to stop that arc from bending too much towards justice. And so this back and forth, America's not evil. America is not good. America is America. And it is a complex, challenging thing of a lot of people with a lot of different ideas trying to work together and figure out what's the right way to live as a group of multicultural, democratic, freedom-loving people.